Hello there, and welcome to Sweet Child of Time and one of my stories. We're talking about a movie today, so of course I had to bring in Lindsey Dunn from one of my stories to discuss this with us. So how about an ahoy there for Lindsey Dunn? Ahoy, Lindsey.
Ahoy, Steve.
I wanted to bring you right in for this because we're talking about movies. It's you and me again. It's been Time Bandits for a while now, and it's good to talk about a movie again.
Yeah, do you ever watch those?
Heck yes, absolutely. I watched this one. We're going to be talking about a movie that I haven't even said yet, but of course it's there in the episode title. It's called His Three Daughters. I watched this today on Netflix. I know you watched that. Of course we saw His Three Daughters, but what else? I saw Cat Owl Lake. That is one that I'll briefly mention that I think our listeners should absolutely watch. It's absolutely a Sweet Child of Time movie. It's a one of my stories worthy movie. It's definitely a must watch. It gets really good in the third act. Have you been watching movies? That's kind of like your thing. What's been like the coolest thing you've seen lately?
I've been watching a lot of, retro kind of movies, but the new one I've watched that might be of note is Things Will Be Different, directed by Michael Felker.
Okay.
And it is also a very Sweet Child of Time movie and one of my stories, but low budget. Some people are calling it a lo-fi horror or definitely science fiction, but to me, it's very innovative. It looks beautiful. It's kind of a multiverse type of movie with a brother and sister as a lead, which is something I don't think we always see that. We see a lot of movies have like a romantic lead or maybe child parent exploration, things explored, like the movie we're watching today, for instance. Mm-hmm. But having kind of a sibling relationship as the key relationship, I thought was one of my favorite parts about the movie. But definitely very, this is the editor of many of the movies I've talked about before. He did Something in the Dirt. He was the editor for that. He was the two guys. It is Aaron Moorhead, Justin Benson, Aaron Moorhead. They did Something in the Dirt. They've done The Endless. They've done a lot of time travel, science fiction movies. And the editor is his first directorial debut. I thought he did a fantastic job, and I highly recommend people check that out. One of my friends did a podcast, I won't say which one to out him, but they did a podcast where they talked about how this movie did not cut it for them. And I was arguing with their points the entire time at my house, like as I was listening. So
it wasn't me, obviously. So I
it
know
was not you.
I know I'm not in the bag from this one. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, you recommended this to me maybe like a few days to a week ago, and you mentioned the brother and sister combo. And I immediately thought, well, that's interesting because that immediately takes out any type of like love interest or any type of like thing like that out of the story. And I like that. It made me immediately think like, okay, we're going to have like a sibling dynamic throughout this movie. And I haven't seen the movie yet, but just knowing that going in, it kind of sets you up for like what it's going to be. So like these people are going to be real with each other. They're probably going to be insulting each other and quick to forgive each other too, because they're siblings. That's a neat perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sibling relationships are always really interesting. And this one gets a lot to it, regret. And like when it comes to your siblings, a lot of times we have regrets about things we've done to our siblings, even if they seem to have forgiven us, like we feel some amount of guilt that we could have been a better brother or a better sister to this person, and how that might inspire you to do something kind of drastic or dramatic because you feel like I need to make up for that moment that I failed or I didn't do what I could have done to protect them.
Sure.
And that bond can be, sibling relationships are very complicated. Oftentimes, we argue a lot with our siblings, or we feel like they don't quite get us or we don't quite get them. But those are the people that, you're with, you know them the longest after your parents die. They're the ones that have known you the longest. And, they're going to bury your parents next to you, hopefully, if they're still around. And yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and so fitting conversation here because we're talking about some interesting dynamics with his three daughters. I mean, this movie itself, when I first heard about His Three Daughters, I already knew I wanted to see it. Just based on the three leads of the movie. We've got Elizabeth Olsen, Carrie Coon, and Natasha Lyonne. Like three like powerhouse actresses, in my opinion, who've done like some awesome stuff. So when you recommended doing this, that's not even why I brought up the brother and sister duo in the science fiction movie. It just tied in so neatly that I'm going to go right into his three daughters. So I was really on board with this movie. And when you suggested us talk about it, I was absolutely on board with that. So I'm going to turn back to you. So what was appealing to you about this movie, and why did you choose to see it?
Well, if you're a longtime listener of Sweet Child of Time or one of my stories, you've heard me talk about, moments of loss or grief that I have, and that often people are very different about how they handle what they watch. For some people, they want an escape. They want to escape their grief or their loss by watching something completely different. So if you're having a really stressful time, you're going to watch something, maybe a romantic comedy or something really low key. But for me, I often want to embrace what I'm feeling by watching something that is devastating in a way. And we obviously like the show Dark. And I found Dark at a dark time in my life. And I felt that I could resonate with the pain the characters were experiencing on screen. So for me, like when I got a magazine, as a film critic, I get this magazine called Q magazine. That's Queue. And it's put out by Netflix. And I get this magazine quarterly, and I've been trying to figure out how I can unsubscribe from the magazine, because I'm like, give me the DVDs, give me the t-shirts, give me the weird food and wine that you're sending on Netflix. But I don't want this magazine because I don't have time to read. But I saw the article about this movie and saw the actresses, and I just don't always read things that closely. So I knew there was a movie coming out I only saw Natasha Lyonne. I didn't really register the other two. But when I've had recently an incident happening with my parents where they're obviously approaching the last act of their life. And so these characters in this movie are approaching that, but a little farther down. Like they are watching their father sort of enter his last weeks, and they're all hanging out at this house waiting for him to die, basically. And I thought, well, this is kind of perfect, because my dad and my mom are not dying, but they are both hospitalized and going through new challenges with their health. And I'm in the position where I'm having to make all the decisions. I had one of the characters, the Carrie Coon character, who's named
Katie.
Yeah, Katie. The first thing we see her doing is she's really into this DNR, do not resuscitate order, and she's wanting to get this paperwork. Oh my gosh, she's ready to, emblazon it with gold spray paint or something.
She's obviously fixating on that in her pain. Yes.
So I was just, the week before asked, if something happens with my mom, do I want her to be DNR, or are we going to do CPR? So a lot of the things that they're thinking about in this movie, I'm going through right now. And we see three different daughters, all who handle this in very different ways. And ways that are very relatable, and probably you can figure out which of these three people you're the most like. So just thought I was like, all right, let's just dive in here and embrace this. And I wanted to talk to you, and, threw the name of another person who will remain nameless out there and said somebody else who's gone through this. And so it's like, that is why I wanted to watch the movie and talk about it, because I find it to be very current events for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, the third individual, who shall not be named, handles that type of thing differently, because they also have recently went through an end of life situation, and they were there at the very end of that life. It was in a hospital bed, not in a hospice situation. It was at a hospital, but they were able to say goodbye at the very end, along with all the other family. And it was very painful for this person. And so revisiting that is not a great experience. And seeing this movie and seeing what the movie was about, they immediately noped out. They were like, I can't talk about this without getting upset. So I would rather talk about something fun. So that, like you said, you want to watch people that are going through a very similar thing. This person likes to watch people do comedy while they're feeling tragedy, or maybe like when, they're more apt to more drama stuff when they're in a more lighthearted mood, kind of the flip-flop effect.
Now, which are you, Steve? Do you like to watch things that are similar, or do you kind of need time to like get past
Hmm.
that to watch something that resonates this much with you?
I take all comers. I do. I like, yeah. So I mean, if I can, and I have watched people experiencing the same thing that I'm experiencing. I'm remembering a very personal situation right now that I was in. I can't even talk about the specifics, but I was a wee teenager and I was going through a specific situation with a specific person. And there was a movie that was popular out in the 80s or 90s that was about that exact same situation. So, of course, we went to go see that movie because we wanted to see how the movie dealt with that situation.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of like we were watching it with insider perspective, but
Mm-hmm.
we were watching it like from like a position where we could be above it and kind of like, oh, ha ha ha, that's how they're handling it. Well, in real life, it's more like this. And, like we could kind of see through the facade of what the movie was doing and making it more palatable, where in
Mm-hmm.
reality, it's not quite that cookie cutter,
Yeah. And I will say, I think it all depends too on how the topic is handled,
Mm-hmm.
because I thought this was a
Yes.
very well made movie. But if somebody was doing a movie with this topic, but it was, let's say, a comedy, or, I mean, and that would be okay. You can find comedy and tragedy, but sometimes you have to sort of, okay, it's a comedy, but yet it's still got some truth in it. Like what they're
Mm-hmm.
doing still rings true. And in this case, I thought it was handled really well. Same with Dark. It's an excellently crafted show that is about, death and grief and trauma, and it's a well-made show. So yeah, I'm trying to think. I can't think of any cases where I watched something and I was approached it like you do, because I could see if you watched something and it was not made well, then yes, you'd have sort of this smug like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, that's not how it is at all. Like, what are they even talking about?
Yeah, and that's how we were. It was comical to us, and it was cathartic in a way. It helped us
Mhm,
face these things, but just from a completely different angle,
mhm.
I guess. I also should mention before we get any further too, because the first thing that when James and myself were talking last episode, I told him that we were going to be doing his three daughters, and he was like, "Okay, yeah. So how does that relate to time?" And I was like, well, time comes for us all. Like some in Dark, they say that time is God and that we're at war with time. So Vinny in this movie here, the father in question, is reaching the end of his days. So that's how I'm going to relate this to Sweet Child of Time. And yes, it sometimes can be a sweet embrace at the end, right, child? Isn't
Well, also it takes, I mean, yeah, I know mainly your show is pretty on the nose about time travel.
mm-hmm.
This is one of those things like one setting in an
Oh,
apartment
right.
and over a short period of time. And
Right.
I don't know if it's clearly set up that sometimes, it's like not like day one, this is day one and this is day two, and it kind of marks that for you.
Right.
But it's obviously, it's not quite in real time, obviously, either, but it's kind of this very short period of time in this apartment
Mm-hmm.
where these characters all converge. So,
It could be a
yeah.
great stage play. I mean, we talked about this before we started recording, and both of us agree that this would be a fantastic play that you could perform on stage. No problem. You would only have to eliminate maybe like the trip to the dispensary. Maybe some of the exterior shots would have to be left out, but you could absolutely still have one of your characters wander off stage and smoke, and the security guard comes up and talks to them. I mean, because everything happens within that apartment, within like
Mm-hmm.
really within two rooms, because it's like their living room and dining room are conjoined.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I could see how they would film it with too, because almost, the bedroom is this part of the bedroom that the father is in.
we never go in there.
You never go in there, but I
Hmm.
could see them setting up a set where there's just a doorway that is open. And sometimes, like, there's that really great scene where Natasha Lyonne's character comes, Rachel, she just is kind of standing outside the door, listening
Hmm.
to the breathing machine or the heartbeat, his heartbeat, and saying, you can see like her go through an array of emotions at one time. So you could totally see a character walking to this open doorway and doing that. because everything really happens in the living room, in the kitchen, and the dining room of that apartment. So it would be a really easy set to create.
Yeah. You would need fantastic actors to portray these three daughters, and they did it with these three women. I know we're going to talk about them in a moment, and I'm going a little out of order, but I wanted to say that's another reason that I was really into watching this was the three main actors, because all three of them have recently been in something that has really like inspired me or like really spoke to me. Carrie Coon probably the most, because she played a pivotal character in The Leftovers, the HBO series The Leftovers. It was 3 seasons of excellent TV, maybe like the best show. I would argue maybe as good, maybe alongside Dark. I mean, well done with an ending that blows you away. And Carrie Coon was amazing in that show. And that was just, I say recently, that was like 4 or 5 years ago that aired. Natasha Lyonne I've always been a huge fan of hers. But of course, just recently, she's gotten really big with Russian Doll and with Poker Face, 2 other shows that I absolutely love. I thought about doing Poker Face on Sweet Child of Time. I liked it that much. And Elizabeth Olsen, she's a marvel and she's like a huge actress. But for me, like I know her from Love and Death, which is another HBO series that she did with Jesse Plemons. Talk about another scene stealer. I can just tell you right there, this show has Jesse Plemons and Elizabeth Olsen, and they both play really intense, like high-strung characters that are tightly wound. And it's a win. And it is a win. It's a great show. And because of like those 3 shows I've seen semi-recently, and they really stuck out to me because of these actors. There's no way I was not going to watch this movie, whether you were going to watch it or Heather was going to watch it or not. I was definitely going to check it out.
Mm-hmm. So do we want to talk about the director real quick?
That's exactly what I want to do. Yes.
Now, I'm assuming listeners, I didn't do a stick of research for this. So, Steve, I'm going to put you on the spot here. And you obviously did some research. You've written here who wrote this, produced it, directed it. Is this Azazel Jacobs? Now, I'm assuming you did check and verify it was not first put out already as a play.
Actually, I don't. Well, he wrote it. So I don't know if he wrote it as a play. I'm assuming he wrote it as a film. I don't know that answer to that question. I do know that he had 4 major parts in this movie. Usually you have 4 different people being the writer, producer, director, and editor. He did all 4 here in this case, which I wanted to bring that up too, because I wanted to ask you, since you probably, I'm sure you've seen more movies than I have. I mean, I think I've seen, a good amount of movies, but I know that like both of us kind of lean indie, I suppose, where a lot of times we'll see a film that is like one person's vision, such as this one. One person wrote it, directed it, did it all, had the final say. Then you have movies that are made by a team and they have a room full of writers and multiple producers, multiple executive producers, a different director. And as well as I do, that when you have a group and you have a committee, you can expand on that group and you have a room full of ideas and a room full of experience to pull from. So there's advantages and disadvantages to both. So do you have a preference of like, do you like the one director thing? Like, who's the guy, the creepy guy, the Sixth Sense guy? He's like a singular dude.
M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah. Or are you more, or do you steer away from that type of thing?
I mean, a lot of the independent movies that I see and really like are usually done by, I wouldn't say one person, but they might be, you mentioned the idea of a team. And I find that most of the people I'm drawn to sort of have that team, but it's the same team that happens, like with Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, and Michael Felker. Right. They have sort of a crew and they found people that share their language and because they have that relationship, they have sort of a unified vision, although it's with several people. So I think would say that's the model I'm drawn to, is when you find people who are like, well, this director always works with this composer. Okay. And of course, you can find that with big budget stuff, even, Steven Spielberg, John Williams, that's a duo. So, and obviously, Steven Spielberg isn't a small director, but
that's a good example. Yeah.
But yeah, there's some other composers that I've interviewed in the past, not necessarily like, I mean, we won't name drop Dan Deacon, we just did, but he's worked with many directors. But there was another composer, a couple of them that I've talked to, and they tend to work, they worked with this documentary director, the one that did the Glitch in the Matrix. That guy has done these docu-hybrids that are horror docu-hybrids that he's always worked with that same composer. And yeah, with this Azazel Jacobs, you know, I didn't see, has he worked with other people before, but I have seen 2 of his movies before. Which
what has he done?
Talk about. So the first movie, I looked at his list and there was like 5 or 6 movies. I've only seen 2 of them. The first one was called French Exit. And it was about this socialite, which is played by the woman that was a Catwoman at one point.
Let me think about my cat women here. Eartha Kitt?
No, the older one. The one that worked with Michael Keaton.
Yeah, I can't think of her name.
Michelle Pfeiffer.
We both got it at the same time.
Yeah, it had Michelle Pfeiffer and Lucas. See, this is what happens when I don't do research. Lucas Hedges. But it was during the Lucas Hedges heyday that happened for a while. But it's about this socialite that moves to New York after spending her husband's inheritance. So again, a sort of very small cast, all took place in this New York apartment.
Yeah.
Kind of more like, that's more upper class. But the one that I really like and want to shout out, if you've ever seen it, is this movie called The Lovers, which is about a husband and wife who are divorced and they end up having an affair with each other. It's really funny and really cute, very heartfelt. Again, a small cast. It had these very well-known actors, but they're the kind of people that are in a lot of movies, and you when you see them, you're like, oh, I know that person, but I cannot remember their name. But that one was really cute. But it was these 2 people that have, you know, they think they're done with each other, but they realize there's still something worth exploring. So obviously this director, and I don't know if Azazel is what gender, you know, they identify as, but it's obviously like they like small casts, very intimate movies with interpersonal relationships. That seems to be their brand.
Yeah, and it seems like if they're writing, directing, doing everything themselves, and they have a small cast and they have a small set, then that gives them the freedom to kind of do that. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've always enjoyed like the single person's perspective, and like you have one person's vision that everybody else is trying to help make happen, as opposed to like a committee that's making sure you got to make sure this happens, make sure act 3 is cool, make sure you get a big star in there. I kind of like movies that kind of like trust themselves to like do something weird, you know?
Yeah, you mentioned Marvel as a primary example where you think about, oh, there's probably like a huge group of people in there trying to make that together. Sure. I mean, there are exceptions like M. Night. He's a great director, but I don't think his writing is that good. So I sometimes wish he would bring in an extra writer. But I mean, I think he's an excellent director, and he should be able to find a writer that would follow his vision. I mean, he has ardent fans, but he seems to prefer still writing his stuff himself. And some of his movies have suffered because of that.
That might be true. I know he's got his kid doing it now, but I wanted to bring up one last thing. I was talking about Caddo Lake earlier. Caddo Lake. I don't know how to pronounce it. But, you know, it takes place in a swampy area, and it has to do with like a struggle within a family and some missing people. And there's a mystery involved. And guess who the producer is? M. Night Shyamalan produced that sucker. He didn't write it. He didn't direct it. He didn't have anything to do with any of that. But he did, I guess, put his money up for it because he believed in it. So, you know, if he likes it, it's got to be good.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I guess we should probably get on into talking about these 3 sisters. I mean, they're sisters, but we're talking about his 3 daughters, right?
Yeah.
They're sisters to each other. Yeah. Do you mind if we go one by one with these sisters, and we can kind of like, we can tell the story by describing these sisters? I believe if we go that way, instead of trying to go scene by scene in the movie, I wanted to like make sure we talked about our ladies. Is that cool?
Yes, it is cool. Did we already say what the movie's about? I think I kind of mentioned it, but why don't you you have a summary here, so why don't you read that?
Yeah, just a little blurb. Emotions run high when 3 estranged sisters reunite in a cramped New York City apartment to watch over their ailing father during his final days in hospice care. And yeah, this is a movie that can be summed up like in one simple sentence like that. I mean, because I didn't skip anything, I don't think.
Nope. The New York City apartment part is a little interesting because it's a rent-controlled apartment,
Mm-hmm.
and that becomes a plot point later. But yeah, I think it's
Right.
I mean, when you think about New York apartments and rent control, it made me really think about why there are these rent-controlled apartments. And so
I have
I
some
didn't.
answers for you. Yeah.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, it was sometime back in the 70s or 80s when I don't want to use the word slumlord, but I'm going to anyway. When there was slumlords around New York City that were buying up a lot of apartment buildings and real estate, and then they would, rent out the apartments, and then they would just raise the rates randomly. And it got to a point where sometime in the 70s or 80s where, judicial law got into place, and they had a law placed in New York City that if a person is still living in an apartment, whatever the rent was when they signed in there, that's what the rent shall remain the whole time that they're living there. So some of these older individuals that live in New York they're now passing away, that moved in back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, they're paying 60s and 70s rent prices for their rent, even to this day. So this small apartment that they're in is probably costing him like $400 a month or something like that. Mm-hmm. Whereas his next door neighbor could be paying upwards of like $5,000 because they just moved in because the last person who lived there, is no longer on the lease. So we're going to see an end to that coming pretty soon because eventually, unless a situation like this where the lease gets handed down to the daughter. But yeah, that's the appeal of a rent-controlled apartment. And that's why a lot of people, older people especially, will not move out of New York City for that reason, because they simply can't afford to. They're in their place for X amount of money, and they can't move out and start paying $4,000 a month, which is what the average rent is in New York.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, next topic.
So we're going back to daughters.
Rachel's got it pretty easy there. She's living there with her dad. And we'll talk about Rachel first, played by Natasha Lyonne, if that's all right. Mm-hmm. She's the first one on my list. I didn't choose her because I like her the most, even though I might, but she's just the first on my list here.
I was wondering about that, Steve. It seemed a little suspicious.
She, in actuality, is the stepdaughter of Vincent, who is in hospice care, because he was married and he got remarried. And Rachel's biological father passed away when she was 4. And Vincent is her dad. And Vincent considers himself her dad. And everybody pretty much acknowledges that, she is his daughter. Nobody's really disparaging about that. But there is that.
Except for the other sisters.
That does come into play a little bit with the other sisters. That's right. It does kind of come up a little bit.
Yeah.
I would say that she's a marijuana enthusiast. That's the way I put it. She likes to get high every day. Every day she starts at the dispensary and goes from there. She says she rolls a blunt in the morning and 3 more throughout the day, staying nice and high. One of the things about her that I noticed first off is that she doesn't go into Vinny's bedroom until the very end. She kind of stays out of there. I think that's the first thing I wanted to throw as a discussion point. Why do you think she never wants to go into that room with her dad while her sisters are there?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Of course, as I'm going through what I'm going through, I'm being very hands-on with my care for my mother and father. Mm-hmm. And so it is tough to say like, okay, why isn't this girl going into the room? And I think for some people, there could be several reasons for that. So one of my thoughts is about she sort of wants to avoid these other 2 sisters. First of all, Sure. She does not feel that they accept her, and so they've kind of descended onto the apartment. You could say. I picture it in my head like it's just been her and her dad, and they've had their comfortable relationship that we don't get to witness, but we kind of hear about from different people. And we kind of get a sense of that they had a good,
cozy. Yeah,
they had a good relationship. It worked for them. And then here descending on the apartment now is the other two sisters who have been pretty hands off and not present. And so they are now sort of taking up space in this apartment. And her reaction to that has been to decrease the space that she's taking. So
Yes.
she's now moved into basically her bedroom, and that's her safe place where she doesn't, they're kind of, she's there, but she doesn't have to interact with them. So that's her safe spot, is her room. Then you kind of add on to the fact that her coping strategy seems to be taking comfort in substances. You know, this could be anything. There are people who handle distress by gorging themselves on things. It could be food, it could be alcohol, it could be narcotics, it could be sleep, it could be work. It's an addictive personality. And she's one of those people. So she's coping with this by being high the entire time, right? And wanting to just, it's sort of an escape in a way. And she's into her sports and she's going to bid on these games. So that's the way that she handles it, is by kind of avoiding the conflict. So she's trying to avoid her sisters and she's also in a way avoiding her father. She could also feel like, I've been doing all this work and I haven't had any help. And so now I'm going to kind of take a step back and have some me time for a little bit. She hasn't had that. And, you know, her sister, especially her older sister, comes in and says, you're high all the time. You know, you're irresponsible. You're not helping. She's being very critical. So sometimes it's like, if you have a wife and you have a person who's like critical of everything you do, eventually you just give up and say, well, why don't you just do the dishes? Because what I do isn't being good enough. So I will just let you do it. And then it looks like, well, you're just not doing any work. And it's not that you wouldn't do work, but you're just being attacked when you do work.
Sure.
So I think there's several factors in there. And I'm wondering what you think, Steve.
Yeah, I think completely differently.
Oh my gosh.
I don't think she's getting high as a defense mechanism. I think she is continuing to get high because that's what she's done all her life. She's a stoner. She's a sports bettor. Her dad's accepting of her being a stoner. Her dad watches sports and bets on sports with her. So in my opinion, this is just my perspective, I think that she is stubbornly continuing to do what she has always done. And she refuses to like stop doing her thing because of the situation. Kind of like, you know, we're podcasting right now. This may be a coping mechanism for us, right? So I think that she's stubbornly still doing what she wants to do, what she's always done. And I think that she's been working with her father and she's been helping him there. And her boyfriend's been helping him like go to the bathroom and do more severe things like that. But I think that she wants to continue seeing her dad as a sports dude that loves the Jets. She doesn't want to see her dad as a sick person in a sick bed. And I believe that's why she's not going in there, is because she's stubbornly like clinging to her normalcy.
Is that like a form of denial in a way that
Absolutely.
We're not going to, you know, accept that this change has happened. We're just going to keep doing what we've always done. Maybe
so. I think that she's a very pragmatic person as well. But when she's faced with like when she's faced with her own flaws through the lens of her sisters, I think it kind of makes her be more introspective, and maybe she's not liking what she sees perhaps. Because she's a very pragmatic person. Like, I'm going to do this thing. But then when she gets criticized for it and like it's pointed out, you know, I don't know. I think it's almost like she's pragmatic to a fault. I'll just say that.
Yeah. I mean, she obviously does care a lot about her father. So just because she's not going into his room doesn't mean she's not interested in helping him. But I don't know. I kind of think a lot, I think a lot of it still is she wants to kind of avoid interacting with her sisters too. And
sure. I was going to say, speaking of going into that room, like, is her name Christina? She's all about going into that room. Like, she is like, I'm going to go into her a little bit now. She's played by Elizabeth Olsen. She's the youngest sister of the two. And she is biological sister with Katie. And of course, like stepsister with Rachel here. She is all about going in that room and sitting with him and singing with him. Again, almost to a fault, where she keeps telling the other two, like, yeah, I'm going in there again. When are y'all going? When is your shift? she's not directly asking them for help, but she obviously would like somebody to take that burden from her. I'm not sure why she feels the need to always be there. Maybe because she lives so far away and she feels like she hasn't been around. So now she wants to like stick by his side like glue, perhaps. But it does seem like she kind of has a chip on her shoulder about that. Like, when is Rachel going to go in there? Or will you take my shift, Katie?
Well, see, I disagree with that.
Okay. Yeah. What's up?
And part of it I agree with. She obviously, I think her is like, there's different ways. It's almost easier for me to kind of talk about all three of these girls at the same time than try to separate them. But Christina wants to spend as much time with her father as possible. And so she's all about just being in his presence. She's going to just go in there. She's going to talk to him. She's going to sing to him. She thinks that he should not be alone.
You're right.
I didn't see her. She wasn't the one that said, well, she hasn't taken a shift. That's more Katie, the one who's being critical of Rachel. She's the one that kept saying, well, when are you going to go in? Christina doesn't really say anybody else should go in there, but she's kind of like about presence, just kind of being in there, and so that she's available for him. You know, Katie is burying herself in work and tasks. That's her coping strategy. She's just gonna get as much done. She has a checklist she needs to get done, and she's very angry because she feels like she's just doing work. It kind of reminds me of the sisters in the Bible, Mary and Martha. I don't know if you remember that story, but there's the two sisters of Lazarus, Mary, Martha, all like these siblings that are really good friends of Jesus, and he goes to visit them, and Martha is busy with the visit. Like, she's all about, like, we have to make the house look perfect. We have to clean everything. We have to serve the food. We have to be good hosts. And so she does that with her hands and serving. And Mary just kind of sits at Jesus' feet and talks to him and listens to him. And then at one point, Martha's like, Jesus, can't you tell my sister to help me? And Jesus kind of says, well, you're busy with many things, but Mary has chosen what's better, is that I just want to spend time with you. You know, like, I don't need you to break your back, you know, doing all this stuff, especially if you're going to be resentful. So, you know, Christina's the more kind of emotional, outwardly emotional person. You know, she's doing meditation. She's doing yoga. She's apt to cry the easiest. She's very emotional, and
yet she never asks for help. It seems like that's kind of like one of her flaws, is like she presents a front that she doesn't need anybody to help her. Her dad confirms that later. And it seems like she appears as if she doesn't need help, and she likes to put that front up, but then she's kind of like, why isn't anybody noticing me, or why doesn't anybody see the real me?
You also find out she has this previous life as a Grateful Dead fan. Is that what she was?
Yeah, Deadhead. She was into
Deadhead, yeah.
I thought that was interesting because what that kind of told me was that I wrote it down here somewhere, that she didn't quite feel like she fit with her family, and she found her family with this gathering of people who go follow the Grateful Dead. And one thing I like about Katie a lot is that she criticized John Mayer being in the Grateful Dead. And I agree with Katie 100% on that one. Katie's like, even with John Mayer, you like that? And then Christina says, you know, family is family. Like, he is into this, John Mayer is into this thing, and he's kind of different from everybody else, but he's part of the family, so we accept him. And I kind of thought that was like a tiny little echo of, like, you know, what they could learn within their own family too.
It was interesting that she's sort of you could say she's maybe the more traditional seeming person.
Yes.
On the outward. Like, she's obviously she's a wife, she's a mother, and her sisters kind of see her as, oh, your life is perfect. You know, that's right. What you're showing us.
She's an Instagram mom. That's right.
Instagram mom. Yeah. But kind of doing this show, the Deadhead thing, she has this conversation later with Rachel where she kind of says, it was never about getting high. It was just people who wanted to feel accepted. And so they do that by talking about a bonding over this music. And I thought that was interesting, Steve, because I was of course thinking about like, Steve and I do that with our dark people. We all get together and talk about it. And you also talk about Time Bandits and you talk about the Wheel of Time. And so you have these different groups that
that's right,
that join you in a particular interest, and how nice that can be, because sometimes the people that are in our family or are close, they may not like the same things we do, and so you kind of need those other spheres of people to be able to combine with you.
That's right.
Perhaps she, out of all three of the sisters, is the most that she's maybe found community outside of her family. Perhaps she has more friends that she can turn to when the chips are down.
Maybe.
Whereas Rachel may not have that, and just kind of has her dad and this friend, which I don't even know if he's her boyfriend, but he's obviously a close male friend.
They're cuddling. Yeah, man. Come on, they're cuddling.
They're getting high. They're not cuddling. He kisses her on the cheek. He kisses her on the cheek and he gives her a hug, but it's not like sexual, really.
I think that's another thing that we can examine when we get to that too, because that was something I wanted to ask you. I want to not wrap up with Christina, but another thing I wanted to say about Christina though, because I'm really itching to get to Carrie now. But I thought that one of the lines that she said towards the second half of the second act really stuck with me. And I think let's just see what I wrote here. I wrote, her examination of their relationship reveals that they have wildly different views of each other and don't truly know each other. And they are rigidly sticking to their misperceptions of one another. So like the two, Rachel and Katie, like kind of view Christina as like this perfect mom type. And it's like nothing will like break that image from them. And they're going to stick with that image until something like makes that change. But until that change happens, that's how Christina lives inside their heads. And it may not be an accurate portrayal of who Christina is. I thought that was just very interesting that the three of them, like we might not know who the real Katie is. Katie could be like a super cool, laid back person when things are going well. But I know when she's stressed, she goes high strung.
She brings up the concept of stories, doesn't she, Steve? Like she says, we all have different stories of each other. Christina does. She mentions that which is when they get in the conversation about, well, your life is perfect. But she's like, no, we all have different stories. Like just like the apple thing, like Katie saw that and thought that Rachel was just being lazy and only getting her dad getting apples, and she hadn't gone to the grocery store. But that's what the father had asked for. And she later says she made the wrong assumption. And I think Christina very wisely says, she doesn't say this, but she's kind of getting at, there may be a lot of wrong assumptions that we're making about each other.
That's right. And Katie, I'm going to move on to her now.
Okay.
Played by Carrie Coon. It seems like from the very beginning, she prejudges people, like not in a prejudice kind of way, but like she finds fault before fault even begins, it seems, especially with Rachel. I guess Rachel is like being the recipient of a lot of her stress. Katie is into the scene now. We didn't mention, so I'm going to clarify it now. Christina is like the younger daughter, and Katie and Rachel are of about the same age. They're a little bit older, but as we said before, Rachel's like a stepdaughter. However, Katie and Christina also have a bond with each other that the rest do not have, which comes through in this language that they speak to one another. Where I can't discern their language. They have some sort of pig Latin, but I got the gist that only the two of them know this language because they were talking about Rachel and they were talking about their dad in this language, which I thought was interesting. And I bring it up at the tail end of talking about Christina because we said, which I think is kind of correct, Christina doesn't feel like she kind of fits in. She's the younger sister of the two. Yet she and Katie have this strange bond with each other. What do you think that's about?
I mean, they're the ones that they grew up. It was the two of them, and they had this alliance, right? Because they were the original two. And then later,
biological sisters, sure.
Yeah, biological sisters. That's how I see it. You align yourself with siblings at different times. When I had two sisters, so I idolized my older sister. But there were times that out of necessity, I had to, it didn't happen as often, but I would line myself with my younger sister because Sarah was doing something I didn't agree with. And there were times when Carrie and Sarah would, make me feel left out. So you align yourself. I think they had this secret language, and they could have had it before that.
Oh, before Rachel even came in the picture.
Yeah, but they
Okay.
could have also used it to kind of keep their special bond and be able to have that language. I don't know. They talk about twins who speak
Okay.
a separate language. So
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, well, Katie, she's the person that we first meet in the movie, and she's dressing down Rachel right away. So we right away get the vibe that she's a high-strung person, that she's wants to take control of whatever situation she finds herself in. So in this situation she's in, she's really big on that do not resuscitate order, and she's like, that's a fixation for her. She wants to take control of writing the obituary. She feels like that's a very important task that must be done. And she wants to criticize Rachel. Rachel is there as kind of a scapegoat, and Rachel is providing a lot of fodder for Katie to criticize. I'm not saying that as a fault against Rachel, but I think I'm trying to think how to word this. Like if Rachel was more, she kind of has this kind of no BS kind of attitude, right? That's like Natasha Lyonne's style, where it's like you just can't BS her. All right. So because of that, the way that she is just lives in her own person, she's not going to playsate to Katie. I think a lesser person, or a person with less willpower, would just bow to Katie and just do what she says. Okay, I'll get that done. Sure. Okay, whatever I can do to make you calm down, we'll do that. Rachel's not interested in playsating to Katie. She's going to be wise ass if she feels like that's the proper response. And what I guess what I'm trying to say is Rachel doesn't always give the correct response that you would expect, and that in turn turns up Katie's fire a little bit more. And when she talks, she's like us. She's a stream of consciousness talker. I like this one scene where she knocks on Rachel's door, gives her a huge dressing down about smoking marijuana. Rachel just stares at her the whole time and then just simply says, okay, and closes the door. Meanwhile, Katie had said a diatribe of 10 paragraphs in a row about how she felt, and doesn't give the other person a chance to respond. Maybe I'm just realizing this now. Maybe that's part of it. She doesn't want to give them a chance to respond to her. She wants to buzz roll over them.
Well, I think that comes from the assumptions. She's made a decision already about what's happening, and she's got her counterpart, her counterpoint to what's happening, all saved up, and has planned out the conversation she wants to have. And you kind of you plan out, you're going to have this sweet moment of really going to tell them what's what. And you kind of forget the fact that that's not a conversation for you to plan out this. Right. That's a letter, she could write it, deliver it under her door and not leave a response. But yeah, it is kind of funny. And it's all about her not smoking marijuana. But then, of course, Rachel goes outside, and she's not allowed to smoke out there either.
Right. But she feels more comfortable telling the security guard, screw you, I'm going to do this anyway, than she does to her sister.
Yeah.
I mean, Katie is kind of right in a way. Maybe don't smoke it in the house in such close quarters when you have company or when a sick person's there. But yeah, she's not exactly going about it in the kindest way.
But also she was like, I smoke in the house all the time and Daddy doesn't mind. He likes the smell.
Right. I mean, that's another instance of them coming in and changing the vibe of the household with their presence. That's correct.
Mm-hmm. Something I wanted to pick up on is, we probably all have our favorites, or, I kind of we probably have we like the way this person is better than the other. But, in a way, it's good to have empathy for all three of them.
Sure.
And something I want to point out about Rachel is that she's very in tune with other people's emotions. But they all kind of are, but they're handling it different ways. Like Christina's the one that kind of intuits and can bring it to the front and say, what I think is happening and kind of present it in a clear way that doesn't sound like she's attacking somebody.
Sure.
That is her gift.
Yep.
Whereas, Rachel's very in tune. She's not necessarily being verbal or communicating, but she is very like when that guy, Benji, is that his name? The boyfriend that you're calling him. She says, he's kind of like given her sisters his own opinion inside her bedroom, and she's like, hey, those are my sisters. I can talk about them bad, not you. And she stands up to them, and she's like, I just don't need. And anytime any of the people kind of get upset, she's quick to like say, no, I'm sorry. Well, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. It's okay. It's all right. It's like, I'm just talking. I'm just high over here.
Yeah.
So she is very like aware of the emotional temperature of the house.
Yes.
And with Katie, she's just a much more, and like with Katie, people are probably going to think that I really dislike Katie. And it's not that. I guess I see parts of myself in Katie and I don't like it. I don't want to be that person. But you sort of like, you have your list and you're just going to plow through it. And you sometimes end up plowing through the people that are in front of you unintentionally. But she does, to her credit, once she realizes she's done something wrong, she is there to apologize. She wants to apologize, but she just doesn't have the correct demeanor. And like, she's like, hey, I'm sorry. I said I was sorry. Like she's more.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting, their emotional, like the way that they're trying to handle things. They all are aware of the emotions in the room, but they may again, they're handling it in different ways. Yeah.
I think it's simple as Rachel is very good at reading the temperature of a room. She can come into a room and she can join it. Whereas Katie needs to control the temperature of the room to her liking in order to make everybody else, in her mind, she's going to control the room, control the temperature, and everybody's going to be happy that she's doing that. And she's going to do it for the good of the whole room. That's in her mind. That's what she's thinking, but it's not quite coming out. Katie is probably the figure in this, out of the three sisters, that I'm most familiar with, that I've encountered in my life most, from being like a parent of kids involved in like school and scouting and talking with other parents and just being a parent. I think Katie is probably a more like accessible person to me because I'm familiar with that style of person. And there are some advantages to that. In this situation that she's in here, she's maybe could take some reins back, of course. I mean, she's going to be who she is, but she feels like she's doing the right thing by this do not resuscitate order and criticizing the food in the fridge. The food is not to her liking. She feels like she can control her own household, her husband and her teenage daughter, while she's not even there. Like, she's like, oh, if I hadn't been on the phone texting with them, they would have not gone to school and they would have just laid in bed all day probably. Like, she thinks that she is like the prime motivator of everybody around her. So she's driven to do that.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up too. So I'm glad you brought that up, that you hear these little moments where she's interacting with her daughter. She talks, I guess, as the oldest, she has teenage daughters.
Yes.
And she's I thought it was interesting that you said, she's trying to control and thinking she's doing the right thing, but she's really like alienating everybody around her because she's trying to be this controlling person. And if she had a little more, she's got the weight of the world on her and is trying, how does it feel to try to hold up the world with just your two hands? Not just at your house, but all the way over here. But she's really just alienating her daughter because she's being a helicopter parent, right? Like where she's thinking she has to wake up her kid and do all that stuff. And it's probably like, if she kind of backed up, you'd probably see that kid, you might see them falter for a little bit. They might get some bad grades or whatever. But once they kind of understand, you've got to take some responsibility for yourself, you might see that kid rise to the top. You have to kind of show faith in people and be there to support them, but not think like, you're not going to do it if I don't tell you to do it.
Right. Luckily, Katie's two teenage daughters have a super cool aunt, Rachel, who lives kind of nearby. And like that's a neat part of the movie where we see their relationship get better towards the end, where they're actually able to speak to each other. Rachel gives, Katie that same advice. Like, yeah, I heard you talking to your daughter and your daughter's going to be fine. You don't, she basically told her the advice that you just said that came from Rachel's mouth. Sweet Child of Time is brought to you by Zencastr. Zencastr is the way we record Sweet Child of Time. We hook up with our guests via video and we record it on audio. Recently, we've been doing video podcasts with the cast of Time Bandits. It's easy using Zencastr. You can record video or audio. You can also edit your podcast or your video via Zencastr. Join Zencastr using my promo code Sweet Child of Time and you can get 30% off Zencastr. If you're ready to start your podcast, it's time to share your story. Share it with Zencastr. That promo code once again, Sweet Child of Time at Zencastr.com.
Vinny mentions that's the father's name.
Mm-hmm.
When he at the end, which we can talk about what happens later, but there is a point that he says that Katie and Rachel are actually a lot alike, and that's why sometimes they bump up against each other. So what did you think about that statement, and how do you see that being true, and how is it true?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily true. I think what he was alluding to, I'll correct you there, Vinny. You're a little bit wrong. Just like I was saying before, how Rachel won't just defer to Katie. Instead, she has her own opinion and her own, wherewithal. So she's going to fight back with Katie. And I think that's what he meant, is that the two of them fight with each other a lot because they're both strong-willed, and maybe Christina just kind of goes with the flow a little bit better than the two of them do. Because I really didn't see Rachel being I didn't really see Katie being a go with the flow kind of person like Rachel is, and I can't see Rachel being uptight and controlling of every situation like Katie is. So that's why I say I disagree with Vinny. And he knows his daughters better than me. But from what I can see, the thing they have in common is that they are very strong-willed and they will, stick to their story no matter what. Mm-hmm. Did you see them? Did you see something I didn't see that they were?
I mean, you brought up the point that these two are actually the same age.
About the same age, yeah.
About the same age, that they both are sort of strong-willed, and they might both, I see that maybe they both have trouble asking for help.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And Christina's the one that has the idea that, because Katie's been asking Christina, would you help me write this document, the obituary? Mm-hmm. And Christina finally says, I think maybe Rachel would be better at that.
It's true.
So
that was wise.
She kind of sees that like maybe those two could help, but there was also an interesting moment when Angel comes in and says, who's the hospice worker, which we haven't really talked about him yet. But he mentions that, you should prepare yourself, he could die at any moment, like he's a farther along than we thought. And so I know I probably have I don't mean to offend any native New Yorkers. So I probably should stop doing that.
Get out of here.
But he mentions that, and then both Katie and Rachel are annoyed. They agree that he should stop saying stupid stuff like that because it's not very compassionate. And, so it's like they do sort of seem to share some thoughts when they aren't opposed to each other. They have maybe some similar stuff. And they both used to, the Katie used to smoke weed. It was cheap weed. But
that's right. It's surprising that Christina does not. I fully expected her to smoke weed on the bench with Rachel when they sat down, and that did not happen. Thought that was really an interesting choice, because I was like, surely she would get past the joint, but maybe that's just not her speed. Maybe Christina is more of like a naturalist, more into yoga and meditation than she is to substance. Mm-hmm. Hats off. Rudy Galvin, who plays Angel. I'd like to go into that since you brought it up, because that is something that they were able to unite on, the two sisters. And you mentioned that too. I was going to bring it up back when you said it. You and your two sisters, and every now and then you would have an alliance with one that was an unlikely alliance. Y'all would have a common enemy, so you would team up with the other. And that's what, Rachel and Katie did here. So I wanted to ask a little bit about Angel here, our hospice worker. So he does succeed in uniting the sisters with himself. But before that happens, his words are interpreted differently by the sisters. Like he'll say something and then it seems like Katie will cling to like some certain aspects of what he's saying. Whereas, Christina may not have like thought that that's what he meant when he said that, right? I think that is a way that like all three sisters are hearing the exact same words come out of the exact same guy's mouth, but they're all interpreting it in very different ways. Towards the end, their interpretations line up with each other, Katie and Rachel's, which is good, but we see some division at first. So I wanted to ask you, were you kind of agreeing that from the get-go, Angel was maybe inappropriate or getting involved too much, or did you think that's what his job was?
No, I mean, I think when you're going through a hard time like that, you want someone to come in and kind of take a position. He's not taking a position of authority, but he is taking a position of someone with experience.
Yes, that's right.
Like he says, we will be the ones you call when they die, and we'll be here at this time. He knows what he's doing, and he's speaking in very clear terms. I thought it was a little inappropriate for him to keep saying like, he could die any moment. Like, yeah, that's why we're all here.
Mm-hmm.
But, sometimes he probably has, I'm guessing that they have like a code of conduct, and there are certain things they know they're supposed to say to protect themselves legally, as well as, as
Absolutely.
a healthcare professional.
Yeah.
So these could be part of, ways you prepare. I've never directly worked with a hospice worker, so I don't know if he is representative of what you would expect or not. So I can't speak to that.
I think he was overstepping his bounds a lot.
In what way?
Giving them more information and more to chew on than they really need at that moment. Because the one hospice worker who was the female, I didn't catch her name, but you see her a couple times coming in and out, and Katie is like overly nice to her, which is annoying. But that's usually the job of the hospice worker, is to go and care for the patient, take care of the patient and make sure they have everything they need, and make sure that, from an hourly basis, they're doing okay. They're not there to give medical advice or that's a doctor's job or a physician's job. I do believe that he was, maybe taking advantage of the fact that he did have a lot of experience, and he did see himself as more of an authority figure than maybe he actually was. So like he's like sees this room and he sees like these women who are looking to him for answers. So he wants to give them those answers, which is in itself is excusable. But I got the sense that he was maybe giving them more than they needed to be fed at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. He had a partner that we didn't really see who was in the room. So it might be that like she's the caretaker person, and he's more of the the outward facing person that works with the customers. But yeah, I mean, he talks about something like, yeah, maybe people wait to call 911.
Mm-hmm. That's what I didn't like.
Yeah, but to his credit, they were sort of putting him in a situation where they were kind of expecting him to solve a problem that they had. And I mean, I can relate to that, because I'm sure going around, I'm talking a lot to people, because I think, hey, you never know if you're talking to somebody who can help you with this problem. But I had a question too about this DNR form. I was curious if it almost like when she was going on about this DNR form, and he says, I know it's important to you. And then she corrects him and says, oh, it's important to him. It's important to him. I'm like, I don't know if I agree with that. Like, is it important to him? Or is it the situation where she heard a nightmare story about somebody's cracking the ribs, and she's like, no, not my father. And he's kind of a chill dude, he's like, Vinny's a chill dude who watches sports and just hangs out with Benji, so maybe he's like, yeah, my daughter wants to sign this form. Sure, I'll do it if it makes her happy. So do you think it's possible that Katie was just the driver all along of that thing?
I mean, yeah. Absolutely. I think it's almost her way of like establishing some sort of like control of
Mm-hmm.
the situation. And yeah, she talks about the horror story of somebody's ribs getting crushed and like it made the situation worse. And yeah, that's the same argument people had back in the 80s when you were all of a sudden it was by law you had to wear your seatbelts in the car and everybody was very mad about that. And people were like, "Oh, well, I heard about this one guy who wasn't wearing his seatbelt. He got thrown from the vehicle and that saved his life. So therefore, based on that anomaly, I'm not going to wear my seatbelt either. Even though the seatbelt has saved millions of lives, it was that one guy who wasn't wearing his seatbelt. I'm going to listen to him instead." I almost see it like the same way. Did I lose my train of thought there with a seatbelt analogy? I sure did.
We're talking about DNRs and how
DNRs.
yeah, how some people feel very strongly about them.
Right. So she wants to get this done. And this is like a life decision that should be on Vincent. So she's kind of correct that it should have been done while he was around. But yeah, I think that it's for her, not for Vincent.
Mm-hmm.
And she is creating this scenario in her head where if he is resuscitated, then this pain is going to last longer and it's going to be more of a lingering issue. And she doesn't want it to last longer. I mean, a do not resuscitate thing is like it's fodder for a heated discussion between the right two individuals, not us. But I mean, I'm sure there's people that are on both sides of the issues that could chew each other out about this thing.
Mm-hmm.
But she is adamant about it, whereas I think everybody else is just kind of letting her take control of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that she's kind of obsessed. Now that it could be her coping strategy to not have to deal with it by burying herself in this task. That could be like one of her coping strategies. But I thought it was interesting that she is so focused on this. So she really picks up on, I think this is one of the things you were getting at with Angel, that he says like, sometimes people wait to call 911. And then she says, "Angel of death, you know, did you see how he basically told us not to call 911.
Right.
And Christina's kind of like, "I'm going to go check on Dad." And she just goes in and does her thing. And that's how I kind of like, I think about that too, because, you know, we have a parent and you're a kid, you're trying to care for them and you kind of decide there's something that's going to happen for their own good. And you go to talk to them about it and you try to convince them. But sometimes they might just be like, "Isn't this a pretty day?" And you're like, "Mom, like I'm not a blah blah." And then you're like, okay, it is a part of control is saying like, okay, things may not all be done like I think they should, but what do I need to do in this moment? It may be I just need to just be here with my mom, you know, right now. One day that won't be possible, but right now it is. So why don't you just be with this person? And that's why I guess, you know, spoiler alert, I would say out of all three sisters, like the one I think that's handling this the best is Christina, because she's choosing to just maximize her time. There might be some flaw about it that I'm not thinking of, that she's not helping more. I don't know. But it seems to me like she's the healthiest of these three girls because she's actually like taking care of herself. She's doing self-care. You see her doing her yoga, meditation. She's connecting with her family at home. She takes a moment when she needs to do something. She'll leave the apartment and take a walk or go outside. And she kind of says, "Yeah, it's good. It's good that I'm going outside and I'm going to." So she's trying to sort of keep that balance. Yeah. So I kind of think, you know, I think she's sort of handling it the best out of the three. But yeah, what do you think about that?
I didn't even consider that question. And now that you mention it, you're right. Yeah, I agree. She may not be the most like put together of all the three. It may not be the most like worldly or the most in touch with herself, but she is the one who's trying in the most healthiest ways to get through this thing called life. Yeah, I do agree with that. You know, because Rachel has her crutches, which, you know, help her, but at the same time, her crutches also keep her isolated. And, you know, of course, we know Katie is a control freak and she's not going to, you know, sit still in a room full of people. She's going to control that room of people. So Yeah, I gotta agree. I don't think Christina is the most like quote unquote likable of the three sisters. She's not the one that I would choose as my favorite, but I think when it comes to this situation and handling herself the best, yeah, I think she gets an A plus.
Well, she and both Rachel and Benji at some point talk about that Christina is kind of crazy. I didn't see that. So what do you what do how do you see her as being crazy?
Yeah, I do. This is my experience is like some of my best friends in school were Christinas, absolute Christinas, deadhead girls into like spirituality, into crystals, into like meditation, into yoga. And yeah, they were all perceived as kind of nutty because they had like a worldview that was slightly askew from everyone else and always overly bubbly and positive and almost saccharine overbearing in a way, right? And I think that is kind of viewed as crazy because it's not like, you're not going to have a conversation with Christina without it leading off to her, making some crazy analogy or trying to wrap it up into some life lesson or, I could be kind of a Christina in a way, I mean, it's like I'm kind of lean that direction. And yeah, a little different, a little crazy, viewed as crazy. That's right. I mean, because she's like that's going to go to a show and maybe she won't be on a substance, but she'll be feeling the vibe of the music and she'll be dancing and spinning and she's getting all muddy and she doesn't care. And somebody's like, look at you, you're a mess. What are you doing? And she's like, can't you feel the vibration of the earth around you? And then the other person's like, you're freaking crazy, dude. But she's not. I mean, she's onto something here. But yeah, we haven't talked much about what is he? What?
The man of the hour? Oh, okay. I've been talking about Vinny, but you're talking about Benji.
I'm talking about Benji, yeah.
Okay.
Because I definitely saw him as Rachel's boyfriend because I think the first time we see him, they're like really close together. Like I don't sit with my like female friends like quite that closely. And you know what I mean? I don't know. I kind of got
small.
I've been in small rooms with people and then we still have like that nice little what do you call it? That that space there. Maybe they don't have it defined. Maybe that here's my guess is that he came into their lives via Vinny somehow. Like cuz Katie mentions that we've never met before. Benji corrects her. It's like, oh yeah, we met before in this very room, in fact. I got the impression what happened in my head was that Katie came over to visit and a bunch of guys were in the living room watching sports. And Benji was one of those guys. And she just doesn't remember him because he was one of a few guys. That's why I think she doesn't remember him. Because if she came in the apartment and just met Benji and shook his hand, I think she'd remember that. But I think if he was part of a group of people, it'd be easier to forget who he was. And I think that there's like a sports crew. They're Jets fans. And you see Natasha Lyonne wearing her Jets jacket. So she and her dad are simpatico that way. And so is Benji. I kind of got the sense that, he was part of like a sports crew, the sports betting crew, and that they have a relationship that's on the rise and it hasn't been defined yet, but they've definitely spent a few nights together and there's a formality with one another that you wouldn't have just with your buddy. I think there's more going on there. Why do you not think that?
Wait. Well, I'm happy to discuss, but I'm also like, does it really matter?
No, it doesn't matter. Well, kind of it does because he's the defender of Rachel. Rachel won't defend herself, but Benji will defend her. So I think that's important. He's kind of like her knight in shining armor in a way, going to bat for her.
Yeah. But I mean, like, if you were like close and if somebody was like being mean to me, you would defend me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure. Maybe. I don't know. There was a time that I did not defend you in our group once. And
what?
It still haunts me to this day.
Why are you bringing up the past? If there is that moment, Steve, that's a regret for you. I don't remember it. So
I'm being facetious. It's just, our group is very fun and we joke on each other a lot.
Yeah, I get called some names sometimes and Steve doesn't. Yeah, you don't always say like, hey, now stop that, you two.
I don't do that to Heather either because like sometimes me and Heather will be hanging out with like, her group of friends. And
Mm-hmm.
there'll be guys that are being goofy and doing their thing. I'm not exactly up there like, hey, don't talk to her like that.
Yeah, but those are
It's
her friends. They're not your
correct.
friends. But if
That's
they're
right.
mutual friends,
Right.
then, and of course the sisters are not Benji's friends, so it sort of
Yeah.
doesn't
Different
compute. But
situation. There's no comparison with us and with them.
I guess whether it's a boyfriend or just a good friend, she says like Benji and I have been hanging out for a while now, and I know hanging out can be code for other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We just see them in it's almost like they're hanging out in beanbag chairs, like it's a college dorm, and they're watching this game in a room. So there's no like kissing or overtures. He gives her a kiss on the cheek. I mean, it could be they're like, they haven't had the talk yet or something.
Or it could be that her dad is sick right now.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Like, if you're right and he could have entered her life via Vinny, or, it could be like someone she just met on the park bench and they started, smoking weed together. And then she invited him up and she realized my dad likes this guy too. So I could see either scenario, but I don't think it's a clearly defined relationship. It's like, but they're obviously close, and he doesn't like at all the fact that they've come in the house and they, meaning the sisters, are coming in the house and are sort of making Rachel feel like she's a lower class citizen somehow.
Right. He was pretty quick to jump in there. He could have just went into Rachel's room and ignored the comment that Katie said, but he felt like he needed to take some sort of stand. I guess because he knew that Rachel would not.
Mm-hmm.
So he kind of felt like they had to be told or communicated to like what he saw. Like he wanted to like let them see his perspective.
Mm-hmm.
He did come on pretty strong, but I sensed a lot of righteousness in what he was saying. And I thought that the sisters kind of overreacted by kicking him out and saying that he was drunk talking. What about you? How did you take his whole speech?
I mean, I thought he was obviously a very chill person. If I'm going to tell somebody off, I'm going to do it a lot more matter-of-factly. I thought he was sort of kind of talking around things a little bit. And so he didn't come out and accuse them or say like, you guys are being bitches. He says,
right.
Where was it? It was right in this room that we met. And who was here with him? He's more just trying to make them think. I didn't see it as coming on too strong. Like he mentions the fact that you're offering me food is in itself an act of ownership. It's like, oh yeah, we're going to offer you food. So we have something that you might want. So he's sort of calling them out on things that, that Rachel wouldn't. But he's not doing it in a super aggressive way. He's more just trying to point out things, and they don't like what they see. You mentioned Rachel doesn't like what the sisters are reflecting back to her. I think they also didn't like what he was reflecting back to them.
Oh, okay, sure. I didn't even think about that aspect of it. So yeah, they just didn't like how they were being viewed. See, I thought they were being quick to I kind of felt like he was being judged wrongly. And that, that was one of my talking points is we can misjudge people, or, they call him a stranger when obviously he's not a stranger. To their perspective, he is a stranger. Who is this person in my father's house?
Yeah.
And then from his perspective, he's like, I've been here for months and months doing the good fight, and y'all haven't been here.
I mean, on the other hand, instead of like coming in the door and walking past them and going straight into the bedroom, if he really was like, I'm not a stranger here, they could have unpacked their food and sat down at the table, so.
Absolutely. Yeah. I got the sense that he was taking cues from Rachel, but he had that kind of look on his face like, yeah, he could have absolutely stopped and said, hey, yeah, yeah, looking back, Benji, you could have been a little nicer at the get-go there. Okay.
They could have sat right down on the living room and started, watching the game. And
what's really interesting about that guy? He's played by Jovan Adepo, and he and Elizabeth Olsen starred in a series together that was about a tragic loss. And they went through like 2 seasons together as husband and wife. So that was really interesting. They got a little bit of a reunite in here, not as any sort of, yeah, it seemed like Christina and Benji didn't really have any sort of interaction. It was all, he was attacking Katie over top of Christina's head, it seemed like to me anyway. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he's got a relationship with Christina too that we didn't know about through this TV show it's called Sorry for Your Loss. So you know it's definitely a heavy one if it's called Sorry for Your Loss, starring Elizabeth Olsen. But yeah, I mean, I've definitely done it before. You misjudge somebody based on their appearance, or you misjudge somebody based on their proximity, perhaps. Like, what is this person doing here? Kind of thing. I don't know if that's something we really need to go into or not. What do you think? Yeah. Those are like most of our major players, with the exception of Mr. Vincent Vinny, played by J.O. Sanders. He's the dad. He has 3 daughters here. Like Natasha Lyonne said when she was trying to like help out with the obituary, married a couple crazy bitches, raised a couple crazy bitches. I was trying to think of some talking points for our man Vinny. I don't really like what I came up with here. Because my question I posed here is, what could Vinny have done better to prepare this situation for his daughters? And there's obvious answers for that. He could have had a living will. Obviously, he did not. A do not resuscitate order would have helped. Maybe reaching out.
If he wanted that,
we don't even know. That's right. I mean, you could say maybe he could have established a better relationship with his other 2 kids, but at the same time, I mean, I'm a dad too, and one of my kids doesn't live with me. And I'm not like always going out, and I don't know. I mean, we have a good relationship. We usually like text or like send stuff to each other on a daily basis. But, I'm not like a daily fixture in his household with like him and like his girlfriend and like, like that's his home. So I'm not like 100% involved in that. So it's like I almost want to criticize Vinny for like, hey, you should have been hanging out with your kids more. When it's like I look at myself and like, consider myself a good father and have a good relationship with my kids, but I'm not exactly over there like, taking dinners and, just spending time just sitting around. So I guess I can't fault him for that. What do you pull out of any of that BS I just said, Lindsey? Do you think Vinny could have done more in his life, or do you think he just kind of did his thing Natasha Lyonne style?
Yeah, we don't get to know a whole lot about Vinny. Anything we learn, we kind of get to know through his daughters, and what, maybe you can sometimes tell some things from parents by the way their kids turn out. Although I don't know if that's always true.
Not
like
always,
you certainly might have a different picture of who my parents are, than they actually are.
Sure.
But you had a question about what could he have done to prepare them. And, we don't know really what he did to prepare for his death. We know he didn't sign the form. I just spat. We know he didn't sign the form his one daughter, that she wanted him to sign. But it seems like he's made provision for his daughter, Rachel. Mm-hmm. He knows that she's maybe the least motivated of the 3 girls to sort of make something of herself according to societal standards. Mm-hmm. So he's made provision for her, and he's planning on, he's bequeathed his rent-controlled apartment to her. So he's provided for his daughter. He has 2, daughters that have some measure of success. One of them's a real battle axe, and the other one is like a happy mom, or at least outwardly happy. So
yeah,
he's made easy friends with this Benji.
Right.
So he's obviously, we would say, maybe he's not a racist. Then he's
New Yorkers can't be racist.
So obviously he was a fun person to just, sit around with. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem like anybody's worried about money. So he's maybe...
That's true.
He's financially established himself.
I think that rent-free apartment is being really helpful in this situation. And we got to take into account the fact that he does have hospice care workers. He has 3 different nurses coming in and taking care of him. He's got all this machinery in his house. Mm-hmm. So obviously, Rachel's been doing something. He's got his medications that he's taken. The house is still looking in decent shape. So,
Yeah.
I mean, other than the fact that he obviously didn't have like a will set aside, which I think that's maybe the only thing that he probably could have done is maybe
Did they
like,
say he didn't have a will?
I know, but no, they did not say that. But I assume that must be part of like a do not resuscitate order, is that you discuss that,
Oh, it's a separate document from a will.
Okay, well, I'm wrong. I obviously am not hip to that stuff. I need to get on the ball myself, don't I? Jesus.
What we've learned is Steve needs to prepare. Yes.
Yeah, I need to prepare. My kids got to be ready for this.
I will say that I sort of, maybe one thing we could bring up with Vinny is I didn't really like the scenes involving him. I didn't like the end. I did not like it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Let's please go into that then. That's okay.
So I think, we're talking about spoilers, everybody. If you didn't know that. So if you wanted to watch...
I'd assume everybody listening to this has already seen the movie.
If you wanted to watch His Three Daughters, please turn it off now and come back later. We probably should have said that sooner, but yeah, we're gonna talk about the end really quick. So what happens is the girls sort of Vinny has a moment where he kind of seems to come to, and he really wants to go sit on his favorite recliner. Right. So they bring him out. They're all sort of they've all had their scream fest, and they're now kind of getting along, or they're in alliance. So they bring him out, and he's after a moment of getting himself set up, he just rips all the cords off, and he's like, I'm ready to get rid of this stuff, and starts kind of giving them a last speech. And he tells them what he kind of wants them to, get out of life, or like what his hopes for them, basically. Then it turns out that this is probably imagined somewhat.
Yeah, it might be a fantasy. Yeah.
It might be Vinny's. We don't know whose fantasy it is, but it's like, it might be Vinny's fantasy. So he has this last final conversation with them. And I don't know, I didn't like that. I liked the setup they had of Vinny is kind of a presence that you feel, but you don't really see him. He's in the room. We all know that. I don't know. I would have been fine with no Vinny moments at all. It's about these three girls and how they're going to cope with life. So to me, that seemed a little unnecessary in general. And I didn't like the fact that it was this fantasy. I don't know. So that's kind of how I see it.
Okay. Again, hard disagree. I love the sisters. I loved everything up to this point of the movie. And I even loved this whole perspective. First off, I want to go back just for a second. They had a little panic moment early in the movie where one of the machines starts beeping in a weird way. And they think perhaps this is it, that he's getting ready to pass away. And the two sisters, Christina and Katie, run into the room, and Rachel's out in the hallway, and they think he's about to pass away. And I got the vibe in that moment that Rachel was ready for it to happen. He does not pass away. Everything goes back to normal, and the girls are giddy with excitement at this point. So I've been around some individuals at the end of their lives, and I've seen this type of thing before where the person is all but comatose, and they come to and they make a simple request, and it becomes like your life's mission to make that request happen, no matter how small or weird the request is. If they want a Canada Dry, you better go get them a Canada Dry. And God help you if you don't. So I think that they were faced with a situation. He awoke, he was conscious, and they wanted to make this a request of him that I don't know if they knew it was the last request, but to go to his chair. So he goes and sits in his chair. And then to us and to the sisters, I believe he simply slips away. He just falls asleep in the chair. They take selfies with him and stuff, which is kind of weird, but it's silly. They're excited. They get to see their dad in a different dynamic other than in his bedroom. He's in his chair where he was more alive, So I do believe that everything that happened was Vinny's fantasy in his head. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it because I think that's something that a lot of people want, and they see that's how it's going to happen to me. I'm going to have my girls right there, sitting on the floor, holding hands while I hold court. and I'm going to tell them, how life is and how love is and how I feel about them. And I think that's a common thing. And it got me. It got me. I cried. Like, I thought the whole speech was like, endearing to me. And then when I saw that, like, it occurred to me, I started kind of thinking it when he went over to the window and the girls all kind of sat there and like looking up at him with the little doe eyes. I was like, I think this might be a fantasy. And sure enough, it was a fantasy. And that kind of made total sense to me. Like, all that was happening inside of his head. And that told me kind of like he's been kind of conscious this whole time, listening to them in there doing their thing. And he thinks he's like Katie and he can like control the situation and control the narrative and tell them, get all this junk off me. Let me tell you, girls, what bliss is all about. Whole story of bliss. That kind of lost me, honestly. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed that fantasy aspect of it. And then like when we see later that he still has all the hospital stuff on him and like obviously that was just a fantasy. I really enjoyed that. I did not enjoy, I'm going to hold hands with you here, and I'm going to say I did not enjoy the ending when Christina sang that little song. I did not like the song. I could really have done without the 3 Little Ducks or the 5 Little Ducks song. That was the thing that kind of took me out of it. And I was like, oh God, are we going to end this movie on a song and a laugh? And yes, we are. So I didn't like that, but I really did like the aspect of him having the fantasy. But the big thing that I was talking about with Heather, because as opposed to watching the movie, Heather just kind of read like a recap review of it that somebody had like talked about different points of it on Reddit. And this person was talking about the chair and like how all the girls, like, it's clear from the movie gives you clues that the father has passed away. And then the next thing you see is like a death certificate and you see cards of sympathy on the table, which tells you that maybe like a few days to a week has gone by. Enough time for people to send cards for sympathy. And then we have the 3 sisters sitting on the couch, and one by one, they all go to the chair to sit where their father sat. Mm-hmm. I guess because they wanted to feel close to him. So I didn't love that scene either. I'm the type of person that would be more like Rachel in that situation, where the 2 sisters were like, oh, I want to sit in this chair. I want to sit where he was and feel where he last laid. And then it gets to Rachel last. And there's a long pause where it's like, I don't think she's going to go sit in the chair. I don't think she's into it. Then she reluctantly gets up, sits in the chair for a second, and then gets out of it again. Mm-hmm. I believe that she didn't want to do that she thought that this whole ritual of sitting in the chair was silly. I think that was silly, personally. Like, that's my fatal flaw. I thought that was a silly thing. Other people, such as Christina and Katie, took that moment to heart and like really felt something with it, whereas Rachel did not. But she pretended she went along with the ritual anyway, just to kind of unite herself with her sisters and to like have something together with them.
Okay, so I want to respond to what you just said. And I want to say, first of all, I didn't hate the entire scene. I liked everything up to I liked the fact that he came out and sat in the chair and took all well, I guess that part didn't happen. But I really think he did come out and sit in the chair. And mm-hmm. That's nice because that was his spot. Yes. He didn't want to die in his bed. He wanted to die in his chair. Yeah. And he wanted to die with his 3 girls around him. So I liked all of that. It was just the whole speech thing. So it wasn't like I hated the whole scene. But the part with the chair, I thought it was fine. It wasn't like I love it so much or whatever. But I want to bring up a different point with the chair that I forgot that I was going to bring up that I think is kind of interesting. I've watched the whole movie once. I only watched half of it last night. One of the last scenes I saw is after the moment when Christina goes in when the 2 others get into the fight and she tells them, I hate you both. You're both assholes. Then afterwards, Katie is going to leave. And then she says, I don't want you to leave. Please stay. And so then she's like, let's all talk. We'll leave the door open and we'll all talk. Right. And so I thought it was really interesting where they all sat. So Katie sat on the couch and Christina sat on a hard chair, like a hard dining room chair.
Yes.
And then Rachel sat in the recliner.
Right.
And the couple of times she's come out of her bedroom, she sat in the recliner.
That's right. Yep. I noticed that too.
So I thought that was interesting because I thought where they sat was like indicative of their characters in a
Yeah,
way.
you're right.
So Katie sits on the couch and it's like kind of like the first place you sit and she's the control person. And then Christina sits on this hard wooden chair because she's like, I want everybody else to be comfortable. I'll sit
Exactly.
here.
Yes, that's exactly it.
And then, Rachel sits in the recliner because that's where her dad sits and it's the comfortable spot. And it's like the favorite chair in the room. And she's maybe the only one brave enough to sit in it. So it's interesting that at the end, you notice she only sits in the chair for 1 second. So, yeah.
I think she doesn't want to do the ritual, I think is what it is. I don't know.
Ritual. Okay.
That's just what I got from, but yeah, you're right. She does take that chair a lot. I noticed that too. And it made me think about I love Borat. You remember old school Borat. And one of the things that he did, one of the jokes that he made is he went into one person's house in character and he sat down in a chair and he's like, "Oh, look at me. I'm sitting in a chair. King of the castle in my chair." And I think that's what the recliner was. It's like the king of the castle sits in the chair, and that's where they are. And Natasha Lyonne or Rachel, I should say, she was pretty comfortable sitting in that chair because she knew that she was going to be the recipient of the apartment. This is happening as we're speaking. I'm realizing this now. Maybe she was reluctant to sit in that chair in the same context that Christina and Katie held the reverence for that chair for their father. Whereas, Rachel's just been lounging in that chair the whole time. So now she's viewing it differently. So she's a little trepidatious about that chair and she's now seeing it in a different light than she was before.
Yeah. And she may never want to sit in that chair again. Or, it's like sometimes, families have they'll like leave a chair empty at the table. And
not true. At the end of the movie, when they're singing the little Five Little Ducks crappy song, it shows like them doing their thing in their lives. And that's where Rachel is sitting, like rolling her joint, is sitting in that chair. And then she gets ready to light the joint, but then she goes outside to show respect for Katie. So yeah, she's lounging in that chair long after everybody's gone. That's the only reason I disagree with you, because I distinctly remember her just casually rolling a joint.
Well, I wasn't hung up on the fact that she wouldn't sit in the chair, but it is true that sometimes people leave a chair at a table that is for the person that's deceased. So I was like, what are you disagreeing with? That does happen.
Or for Elijah. Don't forget Elijah now. Always got to leave a chair for him. But yeah, that's the last scene of the movie. I think that we're about the wrap up point here. Is that Lindsey? Is that right, Lindsey? Or do we have any other key points that we haven't gone over that you want to back up to?
Well, I want to talk about Victor for a second. We got to give Victor his moment in the sun.
Yeah. Okay. When I sent you the list earlier, I left Victor out completely, and that was my error. I noticed that as I started to put my own notes in there. I'm like, yeah, like I just kind of see him as kind of like this schlubby security guard who's just kind of taking care of things, not seeing him as a real person. I'm like, wait, Victor is a real person. We got to give him some due. Yeah. You're right.
I mean, I don't really have much to say about him. I just think he's kind of the comic relief, I guess. He comes out and says, "You can't smoke here," and it's like at first she's like, I love you, Victor, but you're an asshole. Go away.
I got like a big brother vibe from him. Like he's like, he's protecting his little sister, Rachel, but he still has to tell her what's what, but he's going to protect her. And comic relief, I can see that. But then towards the end, like when, she has to tell Victor, yep, we're doing okay. I'm doing okay. Yep, dad passed away. And like Victor was kind of like our cue that, that Rachel is handling this okay and that she can talk about it with other people. So I think Victor is our stand-in for normalcy, perhaps there.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, I didn't have some grand thing to say about Victor. I just wanted to make sure we give him a mention that there's the sort of street cop.
If this was an 80s movie or something, or like an 80s sitcom, then Victor would like come and sit down with Rachel and give her some like wise words. Like he would be the one that would be telling her like the wise thing that she would then go and spread to her sister. I can just see that now in some corny 80s movie. Like, Rachel, you got to look at it my way.
Yep.
But yeah, this movie was definitely, it didn't get like the highest reviews as I would have expected. I mean, I kind of saw this movie as like a 10 personally. I really loved it. And the other thing I didn't like about it was like I said, I didn't like the sing-songy song at the end. I didn't like the way that Natasha Lyonne took the crap out of it at the end and did the daddy little duck goes beep, 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 like imitating like his machine. I did not like that. That's gallows humor I don't care for. So with the exception of that, like, I mean, everything else was great about this, and the performances were fantastic.
I mean, are you saying you got on and looked at reviews from other people, or what do you mean? You said it didn't get high reviews.
I think I saw it standing at like a 7.9 or something like that on IMDb, which surprised me that it was like a below an 8. I don't know. I would have scored it much higher, I guess, just maybe for sentimentality and then just for the strength of the performances of the actors.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think it has. I haven't read any reviews. I think it has awards potential for some of the girls acting.
It would be hard to decide which one.
Yeah, it would be. But I'm not surprised it doesn't get super high reviews because, people who want lots of action and, they're not going to watch this. They're like, oh, they're at their father's house as he's dying. Sounds depressing, like.
Well, I have two thoughts to go out on here. One is that it's Carrie Coon. Carrie Coon is the one that's going to be getting the award nod for this. That's just my prediction. I'm sorry, but in my opinion, when it came to the acting game, I think she brought her A game. Everybody else did too, but I think that she's just, and maybe it's just me, maybe I'm biased, but I think she did like a slightly elevated performance. So yeah, I'm down with that award. And then I had a point B, which has again escaped me because it happens when I start running my mouth, Lindsey. So my great last point is that we're going to wrap it up now, I suppose.
Well, what about your question? I thought you had a good ending question here.
Did I? What was it?
Maybe you'll regret it when I say it, but you were talking about the conversation and that they tell their loved ones how they feel at the end. Have we ever had a similar moment where we were able to say what we wanted to say?
Right. That was it was a good point, Steve. And thank you for bringing that up again. Hopefully our editor, James, will make that all sound perfect. Should I answer that question first, or do you want to go for it first?
Yeah, go ahead, because I got to think about how I'm going to answer it.
Okay. It's going to sound really weird and offhandish because, I've seen my grandparents pass away and my father-in-law pass away. Through work, I had a relationship with one of our contractors. He was like an ex-football star here in Richmond, and he, was one of our contractors through work. He was just a really stand-up guy, always friendly, always positive, always on time, always just easy to work with, never a problem. For some reason, there was one particular day I ran into him at a gas station, and we were just talking over the gas pumps. And I was like, man, you know what? Like, I don't know. Like, we've been working together for like 11 years now. And we don't even know each other. But dude, you were always on point. You were always there. You're always with us. Like, you're always answering your phone. Like, you're the top dog. Like, every contractor should be just like you. You're great. And he was kind of taking it. I was just in a very gregarious mood that day. And he was like, damn, okay. Thanks, Steve. Whatever. Later. He passed away like about 2 weeks later, which I thought was really weird. I was like, and it made me think, I was like, did I say all that stuff to Rodney because like, like a premonition, or what made me do that? Because that's not the kind of thing I usually do. So yeah, that was my little moment. And it was with just an acquaintance, Rodney, who like I barely knew just through work. But I was able to like straight up tell him that he was a great guy right before he passed. And he passed away in a car accident. He was young. He was younger than me. So, it wasn't like I was expecting him to go at any time. That just happened. So, yes, I told Rodney he was a cool dude.
I don't know if I've had, in moments like that where I said what I wanted to say. I have had a couple relatives die, and like a grandmother and an aunt. And it was they both died, I believe, around the same time. And I was out of the country for a little bit. Oh. And so when I returned, my dad was like, oh, you really need to go see grandma. And I went to see my aunt too. But grandma was at the last, days of her life. And I remember going in to see her, and she wasn't wanting, she had stopped eating. Didn't really want to drink water. And that was my first experience kind of seeing someone, knowing that like that's one of the signs that they're going to die is they've stopped eating and drinking.
Yeah.
So kind of that's when they sort of lost the will to continue on. But so I have had that moment where it's like, we're going to go see this person and it's probably going to be the last time you see them.
Right.
And I don't think I had any grand words to say. I think I just, came and held their hand and told them I loved them. And that was, pretty much it.
It's usually enough. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I had an aunt that she had dementia, and I went to visit her in her new residence, and I think everybody else in the family was nervous about going to see her, so I went and saw her by myself and brought her a cake and was trying to talk to her. And yeah, it was really difficult, but I've never regretted the fact that I went to see her, because It's like, you never know when is going to be the last time you're going to see somebody. And I had my sister's, I had a text from my sister that the morning after we had this text conversation, she had passed away. And so I had that text for like 6 years. I didn't delete it because I wanted every once in a while I would look at it and just read through it and remember our last conversation. And it wasn't, I had no idea that was going to be our last conversation. And I didn't say anything great, but it was just more like I told her, I'm sorry that this happened to you, because her fiance had died in the hospital. That's what happened the night before she died. So you're just like, what do you say? Because it was the second person that she had experienced. Like, she had been married, that person was dead, so she had survived, was a surviving spouse. And then she got engaged, and now that guy had died. And I was just like, what can I say to support her at a time like this? And all I could think of to say was, I'm sorry this happened. And I'm like, is there anybody you can be with right now? So I was trying to get her to like call somebody to come sit with her, because I was in North Carolina, she's in Indiana. So I'm just like, is there anybody that can be with? And she said that I don't know. And she was thinking about all the things she was going to have to do tomorrow. So it was, you have to take those moments when you have them, but you don't always know that it's your final moment.
Yeah, that is pretty heavy. Yeah, that's right. And talking, I'm remembering now. Don't want to leave out Uncle Paul. Mm-hmm. I wasn't close with him at all, but he's on Heather's side of the family. But we got news that he was, towards the end, he was in a wheelchair and he was still conscious and still in his home. But he was in Texas, I believe. I want to say Texas. I know we drove an awful long way, multiple nights to get there. This is when me and Heather were just married, I believe. This is a long time ago. But yeah, I went there with her and her family and her brother, and it felt weird to me. I had a different perception of it because I felt weird about it, just because I'm a weird person, Lindsey. I think everybody knows this by now. But it was wonderful for Heather and her family to be able to have that time, especially for like her dad, I think, to be able to have that, because it was like her dad's sister's husband. So, he loves his sister, obviously, but like, he wants to be there. He loves her husband too. And so I think that, they valued that time they got to spend with him, and they're very grateful for that. I just had a different perspective where I felt like an outsider. I felt weird in the situation because it's like, I'm going to meet this person for the first time and he's going to be passing away. And this is the last time I'm going to meet him, I guess. Mm-hmm. So it just felt odd to me. To them, they were grateful they did it. So yeah, I think there's something to be said for that. I was wrong in this situation. I should not have felt weird about it. But yeah, this was a heavy one, Lindsey, talking about his 3 daughters. And I think we're going to wrap it up here, right?
Yeah.
I think we're going to get out of here at this 2-hour point.
Yeah, I was like, we don't have to go through our favorite and least favorite characters. We can just end it here.
That's right. We will. Yeah, but before we do, what can people expect from one of my stories over there, Lindsey? Anything you're plugging right now?
I really don't know. I would really like to do an actual review of Things Will Be Different, like a written review. So hopefully I'm going to have time. Things are just up in the air right now. Listeners, not going to get on to the nitty gritty, but you guys all know that from this podcast that my parents are going through something. So things might be a little quiet over in one of my stories.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't really written any reviews. This is the first podcast I've done since the last podcast we did, Steve,
Mr.
which
Blunden.
was
That's right.
Mr. Blunden. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's been a while. That was when was that?
It was
I guess
roughly 2 months ago, I believe.
Okay, yeah.
The amazing Mr. Blunden.
If you've been wondering if I'm still around, I am. I'm just occupied with other stuff. So I'm not sure what will be coming out. It could be the next thing that I put out would be, a best of the year list or something, because it's getting to that time where we're closing in on the final, 2 months of the year. So
that's right. I'm looking for my Spotify year in review, see how all my listeners were and what I listened to. Let's see. We're in the middle of doing Time Bandits on this podcast, and we always take a little break to do some movies here. However, the plan is in December, also on Netflix, a new series will be coming out based on the book. It's called 100 Years of Solitude. And Lindsey and I have talked about recapping and reviewing that show when it comes out in December of this year. And that's kind of still on the docket, correct, Lindsey?
I haven't eliminated it from the docket yet.
It hasn't been eliminated yet, so you can still maybe look forward to that. Also, on Sweet Child of Time, we're going to be covering Time Squad with James during our off weeks as well, talking about that show, that cartoon about time traveling. And we'll be doing movies and stuff. And check out our music at Introvoid and at Lindsey Dunn. Check out Lindsey Dunn on Spotify. Her music is there, and Introvoid's music is also on Spotify. You're listening to this, so you're already checking out one of my stories in Sweet Child of Time, obviously. But join us on the Discord. We got a Discord at Marshland Media. That's what I'm trying to say. MLM Pod. We have our own Discord where we all chat on there. So I'm going to leave a link, so hopefully you can join us on there. And if
is that link on your website too, Steve?
It absolutely is. You might have to look for it under the little 3 dots over on the right-hand side, but it's definitely in there. But yeah, that's all I'm going to trouble y'all with for right now. Thank you for checking this out. And thank you for the suggestion, Lindsey. I really enjoyed watching this movie and taking the time to really delve into it and talk about it with you. So I appreciate this opportunity.
Yes. Well, thank you for taking control of you. You can be the Katie in this podcast.
All right, on. Well, I hope, Lindsey, you and all the listeners always find water and shade and DNRs. Bye.
Bye.